If there's one thing that exists in every culture, it's made-up scary stories posted to the internet. Japan is no exception. While creepypastas might have risen to popularity in America, Japan has its own share of creepy internet urban legends. And today we're going to look at 4 of them and rank them off of arbitrary criteria that I've decided on beforehand. That's just the premise of this show. We will be grading these yokai and spirits on 3 criteria. How cute or cool they look. This is basically an aesthetics category. If the monster is aesthetically pleasing in any way, it gets a higher score. How weird it is. This would be how strange or out there the general concept of this monster is. Bonus points if there's a specific untranslatable cultural context that I'm missing. And finally, how scary it is. How much of a threat to myself do I think the monster is? Basically, can I take it in a fight? Final grades are calculated on a scale ranking from F to S, with F being the lowest and S being the highest. This show is only possible with viewer feedback, so if you like it, please share it around, show it to your dog, or cat, you know? Just get the word out, man. And if you want to submit yokai fan art, you can DM me at @themorlock on Twitter, or email me at zetaijapanYT@gmail.com. Last week, I received a pretty awesome illustration of Kurote in my Twitter mentions, so the bar is already set pretty high. With all that out of the way, let's log on and look at our first internet horror story. Hachishaku-sama, whose name translates to literally Miss 8 Feet Tall, is a surprisingly recent addition to Japan's monster mythology. She can be traced back to a 9-part story originally posted to 2chan in a thread for serious scary stories only. The poster describes traveling to the countryside to visit his grandparents, and while he's there, he encounters an extremely tall woman wearing a white dress. The woman makes this strange po-po-po-po-po-po noise and then disappears, which, you know, is a little unusual. It's only after describing this event to his grandparents that they let him in on the horrifying truth. His grandma tells him that he had just encountered a creature known as Hachishaku-sama, and that once she has set her sights on you, it's impossible to escape alive. But our protagonist is in luck, because his grandfather actually knows of a ritual to seal away Hachishaku-sama. The ritual involves some very traditional, mystical Japanese items, including purifying salt and some old Jizo statues. To cut to the chase, the entire ceremony goes about as spookily as you would expect, with Hachishaku-sama showing up partway through it, trying to disrupt the entire thing. Ultimately, he's saved in the end, and returns home free of any giant lady following him. But it's after he returns that he gets a phone call from his grandmother. Apparently, one of the Jizo statues had broken in two, and shortly after, his grandfather had died. Now the poster is left wondering if Hachishaku-sama is going to come for him next. Of course, this is where the short story ends, and it's not the only version of this story. One of the most popular in English-speaking circles was posted to a website called Scary for Kids, and it makes some strange decisions. While the original story never said that the protagonist was young, we could assume that he was maybe college age, especially since he's said to be driving at some points. In the Scary for Kids version, they've aged him down to a child from America visiting his grandparents in Japan. Maybe he was aged down to fit the demographic audience of this website. Regardless, this is the version that gets copied and pasted from website to website. For a lot of English speakers, this is the true version of the story. It is interesting to me that a lot of elements of traditional Japanese ghost stories are still in Hachishaku-sama's story, despite it being a more modern tale, especially when it comes down to the purification ritual, the Jizo statues. It feels a little bit older than it should. In fact, this might be what gives Hachishaku-sama some longevity. In terms of popularity, she's up there with Slender Man in terms of internet horror icons, especially in Japan. She has a sizable amount of fan art, a lot of which is just too lewd to show on this channel uncensored. She's also been referenced across manga and video games, most notably in Resident Evil 8, in which Lady D bears a striking resemblance to Hachishaku-sama. And similarly, the internet went wild for her too. But now it's time to measure her up and see where Hachishaku-sama ranks. This is a bit tough, because she is a big lady. And who doesn't like a big lady? But she's supposed to be scary. In the original story, she's supposed to be a unnerving presence, that the main character knows that there's something not quite right about this woman. However, most fan art seems to forget this, and just makes her into a cute, incredibly tall anime girl. 4 out of 5. This is where she's going to lose the most points, because I don't think that she's all that weird. She gets something for making that po-po-po-po-po-po-po noise, but other than that, she's just a really tall woman. A really, really tall woman. And maybe, if you're a Japanese man, that's weird to you. 2 out of 5. Do I find the big lady scary? My gut instinct is to say no. No, I don't find the big lady scary. But I think there's a little bit more to be frightened about than you might realize at first. Her main targets are mostly children, and the whole line about her setting her sights on them and having them not being able to escape, it definitely is scary. While a ritual exists to seal her away, it seems to be very ineffectual. And also the fact that you could basically run into her anywhere before that seems to make her a little bit more of a threat than you might think at first. In fact, a lot more of a threat. 4 out of 5. Befitting of a big lady, Hachishaku-sama reaches up and grabs a rank A in CREEPYPASTA rankings. Unfortunately, that S rank seems to be just a little out of her reach. What has 6 arms and the body of a snake? Why, it's this yokai. Kankandara is the titular creature in a popular 2chan creepypasta. Legend goes that long ago, a small village was under attack from a giant snake. The snake's diet consisted mostly of people, and the villagers seemed to not like that. The villagers turned to a local shrine maiden to ward off the snake. And the battle didn't go so well. The snake immediately bites off the lower half of her body, but still, the shrine maiden continues to fight it off as much as she can. However, the villagers decide that maybe things aren't going to turn out so well for them in the end, so they strike a deal with the big snake. They offer up the shrine maiden as a sacrifice, and in return, the snake will just leave them alone. I don't really see how this, like he was already going to eat the shrine maiden already. I don't really see what he gets out of this, but we're gonna ignore that. The snake agrees, and to help him, the villagers hold down the shrine maiden and cut off her arm so that she's easier to digest. After the snake finishes his meal, he leaves, and for a while the village seems to be at peace. That is, until bodies start appearing in the woods with their limbs cut off. It would seem that the villagers now have a problem with the restless spirit of the shrine maiden that they betrayed. So, in order to seal away her spirit, they section off a small part of the forest that she died in with shimenawa. These are those ropes that are usually used to ward away evil. In the center of this area, they would place a box with 6 toothpicks arranged in a very specific way, and this would keep her spirit trapped within this area. This box would be passed from family to family and would eventually move from village to village, changing names each time. And by the time that this story was posted to 2chan, it was called Kankandara. The name is sort of a bad visual pun. The first two characters are meant to represent the 6 arms that she has, while the latter half is supposed to be the body of a snake. And everything that I've told you to this point is actually the back half of the original creepypasta, which details 3 delinquents going into the forest and getting scared by Kankandara, then running away, and their parents would tell them this whole legend and stuff. It's very exposition heavy. One of the boys is driven mad after seeing Kankandara, but the other 2 are fine, maybe just a little shaken. This might be because she didn't reveal her whole form to them. You see, when she appeared to these delinquents, she appeared just as the top half of her, with the 6 arms crawling around all these trees. Apparently, if they had been able to see the lower half of her, they would have seen a snake's tail trailing behind. And if they had seen that, then there wouldn't have been any escaping from Kankandara. Anyone that sees her in full never lives long afterwards. The creepypasta itself is fine. It's like reading a script to a decent horror movie, but one that still works off of a lot of horror movie logic. Like, why move this box from place to place? At one point in the story, a character's father tells him to go into the woods in order to scare him straight, to scare him out of delinquency by sending him up against a giant snake monster. It really seems like an appropriate reaction. And there's a whole section of the story that devolves into exposition about how the ritual works, what each part of the ritual represents, and I just glossed over all of it in my synopsis up at the start of this part here, because it's not that interesting. It really isn't. And it makes the entire thing a little bit less cool. Which is a shame, because Kankandara herself looks really cool. It's a really cool monster look. It's just attached to a pretty meh story. And because she has such a great design, Kankandara has been drawn across the internet countless times. She even appeared prominently in the anime Other Side Picnic. While not as widely known as Hachishaku-sama, Kankandara definitely has wrapped her way around a small cult following. But is it a cult worth following? Well, let's see. Kankandara is not popular for her story, she's popular for her look. A 6-armed shrine maiden is cool. A snake lady is cool. A 6-armed shrine maiden snake lady is really cool. This would make a fantastic enemy in some survival horror video game, especially something like Fatal Frame. I would play the shit out of a game with Kankandara as an enemy. 5 out of 5. Okay, she looks weird. But our last category was about aesthetics, and this is more about dissonance. If there's some aspect of her story that just seems strange or out there. And I don't think there is. Especially in the context of Japanese ghost stories, there is a concrete explanation as to what Kankandara is. And being the vengeful ghost of a shrine maiden really isn't that weird, all things considered. If anything, it's less weird and more convoluted. There's a lot of steps that go into sealing away Kankandara and just a lot of details that would be better left unsaid or better left unexplained. The original story gives explicit details on how to set up your own Kankandara sealing site, and it is the most boring part of the original story. 1 out of 5. Again, going by looks alone, there is something terrifying about aspects of a spider mixed with aspects of a snake mixed with aspects of a human. But let's think about this practically. How easy is it to avoid Kankandara? Step 1, don't go into the woods. Step 2, nothing. Not to mention that even if you do go into the area specifically designated for Kankandara, you would have to knock over some sticks in order to get her to attack you, and even then, you could still just survive and be fine if you don't see her snake half. Yeah, there's just a lot of rules in this. I think when it comes down to it, I can stop myself from going out to play in the spooky forest. 3 out of 5. Kankandara wraps her way around a respectable 9 points, earning her a rank B in CREEPYPASTA rankings. You'd think someone with 6 arms could manage to grab a higher rank, but alas, here we are. Unlike our other stories so far, the Red Room Curse is literally about the internet. To trigger this curse, you just have to be browsing the web, preferably without an ad blocker on, although this isn't specified. While scrolling through inane posts, you'll be hit with a strange pop-up that says, あなたは好きですか? This message will appear to be deliberately fractured, and every time that the user closes out of it, it appears again. The pop-up will keep appearing until eventually it says, あなたは赤い部屋が好きですか? Suddenly, a list of names will fill the screen, each one a victim of the Red Room Curse. And of course, the last name on that list is yours. What's left of you will be found in your room, which will be covered wall to wall in your own blood. And that's basically the story. There's very minor variations, but all of them leave out the biggest thing: how you die. The resulting viscera of the aftermath remains consistent. After all, this is where we get the name Red Room. But what actually kills you is kind of vague. This legend actually goes all the way back to the 90s, where a Japanese GeoCities site hosted a flash animation that told the story of the Red Room. It's worth noting that unlike traditional creepypasta, these weren't presented as a true story. This was absolutely a creepy fictional flash game that let you know that it was not a real thing. Still, the presentation, along with the pop-up window that immediately shows up after you complete the game, sparked the imagination of a lot of people around the internet. The style of the game is clearly reminiscent of older Japanese sound novels, a style of adventure game that focused mainly on mystery and horror stories. It's basically a visual novel with de-emphasized visuals, so the closest thing gamers will ever get to reading a book. While the original animation died along with Flash itself, the story has been preserved through forum posts and archival YouTube videos. But having the original source being a little bit harder to find gives the original story an added layer of meta mystery to it. The Red Room Curse was a popular scary story, and no doubt tapped into a sort of zeitgeist of 90s internet at the time. In a lot of ways, it's a precursor to the internet horror that we would get in Pulse. Still, the Red Room would leave behind a much darker legacy than anyone would have expected. In 2004, the infamous Sasebo slashing murder would occur. The murderer, an 11-year-old schoolgirl, would be found with this flash animation bookmarked on her computer. One news article that I found even went as far to say that the fact that this scary story took place in a school was probably what inspired her to commit the murder in a school, which is just kind of dumb. But this was just one small part in a larger moral outrage surrounding the case. People were looking backwards through this girl's things, trying to piece together whatever they could find for a motive. So, on a lighter note, let's see how the Red Room ranks. Yeah, I guess the appearance of the Red Room Curse isn't really something you would think of. I guess the appearance of the curse itself is the pop-up. And pop-ups aren't usually cool, they're usually really, really lame and annoying. But the original Flash animation actually does have a really creepy looking pop-up, and all it really needed was black text on a red background and a scary font. The way the text is stylized and the crack going down the middle of the pop-up implying more words hidden underneath just adds to it. Everything is just off-kilter enough to let you know that something is really wrong. 4 out of 5. This curse is less weird and more unique. Internet curses aren't a new thing, but something hidden within a pop-up ad sort of is. A lot of times these will have rules that would just say, email 13 of your friends and then you'll live forever or something. But this pop-up seems to come out of nowhere and attack its victims at random. Not to mention, with Flash now being defunct, GeoCities being a literal ghost town, the story has only grown more weird as it's aged. 4 out of 5. Pop-up windows are like real-life jump scares. Especially if it's something creepy like, do you like the red room? That would scare me. That would really, really scare me. And thinking about it, it makes me think that one could pop up at any moment. Something about this story, despite being just as unbelievable as any other creepypasta, hits differently. This story hits on some weird internal fears that I didn't even realize that I had, harkening back to the days where I would explore around Newgrounds and find weird or scary Flash animations that would scare me shitless at the time because I was a little baby child. And even seeing this Flash animation today, with no nostalgia for it, still kind of gives me those chills again. It is a legitimately well-constructed internet campfire story. 5 out of 5. The Red Room manages to collect 13 points, giving us our first ever S-rank urban legend. And so, to finally answer the question, yes, I do like the Red Room. So this one isn't really a yokai. It isn't really even a monster. It isn't even a curse. It's Kisaragi Station. Kisaragi Station is one of the most famous Japanese creepypastas, and that's with good reason. The story started in a 2chan thread where one user, Hasumi, says that her train seems to have missed her stop, and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. Users quickly start to speculate whether or not she got on an express train by accident, but Hasumi assures them that that isn't the case, as the train finally pulls into Kisaragi Station. Immediately, Hasumi gets off and realizes that something is amiss. She tries calling her parents, but they've never heard of the station before. She phones the police, but they seem to just think that she's joking for some reason. There's no one else around the station, and no sign of civilization anywhere close to her. So, with few other options, Hasumi starts walking back along the tracks, hoping to get back home that way. However, she's stopped in her tracks when she's yelled at by a mysterious voice. She turns around to see who could be shouting at her, and it turns out to be an old man with one leg who quickly disappears right in front of her. Now terrified, Hasumi starts to run down the tracks, as the sound of beating drums starts to grow in the distance. Other 2chan users begin to assure Hasumi that if she can just pass through the tunnel that the train first passed through before getting to Kisaragi Station, she'll be okay. They think that passing through this tunnel might send her back to the real world in some way. Thankfully, Hasumi does make it to that tunnel, and they even find somebody when they exit. Hasumi describes the man as pleasant, saying that he offered a ride to the nearby hotel. Despite the urgings of other 2chan users, Hasumi does get in the car with him, and apparently that's when something changes. He begins to talk to himself, completely ignoring Hasumi. Hasumi assures the 2chan users that she'll try to make an escape first chance that they get, and then nothing. Hasumi never updated again. Kisaragi Station was never found, and ultimately, everyone was left wondering just what really happened. Kisaragi Station is probably one of the best creepypastas out there, mainly because it never takes things too far. So many creepypastas start out as a perfectly fine horror story that just eventually devolves into something dumb and childish, mainly because they're told by children. In comparison, Kisaragi Station shows a surprising amount of restraint, especially when it comes to explanations. Hardly any aspect of this story has a concrete explanation. It's more just a series of weird things that happened at a strange train station. Is there a real Kisaragi Station? Was the old man a ghost? Was the pleasant man actually just a serial killer? Is Hasumi still alive today, laughing about all this? There's a lot to work with. The format also really sells the story. Kankandara and Hachishaku-sama were prose stories told across 2chan posts. Kisaragi Station literally is a series of 2chan posts. People will reply to Hasumi, and Hasumi will reply back, giving the story more of a sense of authenticity. Plus, this story is short, which is an underrated quality in creepypasta. So many of these stories are so much longer than they ever needed to be. Kisaragi Station is written by somebody on the go, and you can tell. Hasumi doesn't stop to overly describe what she's seeing or what's going on. Instead, they are fighting for their lives to get out of this station. And having this story unfold in real time does add a sense of believability to it. And it hasn't gone unappreciated either. The Kisaragi Station story has been translated and retranslated multiple times now, and shows up in a variety of YouTube videos and top 10 urban legend lists in America. And unsurprisingly, it also appeared alongside Kankandara in Other Side Picnic. I haven't watched this show, but I'm kind of tempted to now. So, let's make our final stop at Kisaragi Station and get to the rankings. This is where things get a little difficult, because Kisaragi Station doesn't really have a look. As I mentioned before, Hasumi doesn't go into any extreme detail of what it looks like or how things are there. It's more just a general feeling of an abandoned train station, which itself is kind of a neat aesthetic. The idea of a spooky train station in the middle of nowhere does immediately call to mind some visual elements. Just, not concrete ones. 3 out of 5. Again, this is sort of tough. On paper, haunted train station doesn't sound all that weird, but there is something inherently weird to Kisaragi Station, and by that I mean weird fiction. Elements of this story feel in line with something like House on the Borderlands, what is basically the pinnacle of weird fiction. Somebody accidentally crossing into another world where weird things happen is by its very nature a weird story. And while the idea of a weird location isn't weird on a meta level, it is weird on a textual level. I hope this makes sense. I hope this just doesn't sound like gobbledygook. It might though. 3 out of 5. Above all else, Kisaragi Station works because it's scary. Because seeing the posts get more frantic and desperate as you're going through actually is a little scary. Hearing somebody say, "Oh, I'll go in this car with this stranger," and then stop posting is really scary. But it also hits fairly close to home for me. I too know what it's like to go the wrong way on a train, get lost at a station you've never heard of, and lose all hope of ever returning home. It's what happens every time I go into Umeda. 5 out of 5. The classic Kisaragi Station lands itself 11 points, giving it a rank A in creepypasta rankings. It's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to stay there. That's going to be about it for this episode. I hope that you at least got something out of this rabbit hole of internet horror stories. And again, if you would like to submit fan art or just comments in general, you could always DM me on Twitter at @TheMorlock or email me at zetaijapanYT@gmail.com. Your fan art submissions could show up in the next episode. If there is a next episode, share this around, and there definitely will be. Last time I got a lot of really positive feedback on the format of the show. Unfortunately, that wasn't really reflected in the video's view count, but, who's keeping track of that? So until next time, please try to stay away from extremely tall women, roped off areas of forest, pop-up ads, and abandoned train stations.